Now, California's efforts to desegregate its prisons. NewsHour correspondent Jeffrey Kay of KCET Los Angeles reports.
For 3 decades, California state prisons have practiced racial segregation.
Enemies, besides the northern active members? None.
As convicts enter the system, guards invariably assign bunks in cells and dormitories to prisoners of the same race. Inmates generally support the practice.
I don't want to integrate.
I'm sorry?
I wouldn't want to integrate around here.
Why not?
Not good for your health.
Not safe.
Yeah.
Prisoners say for their survival they must demonstrate loyalty to racial gangs which are hostile to each other. California's prison gangs are notorious for their power and their numbers, says Mark Valente, a correctional officer at the Deuel Vocational Institute, one of California's 33 state prisons.
Okay, in all institutions you have the Southern Hispanics, which are mainly from Fresno south. You have the Northern Hispanics from Fresno up. You have the blacks, they have the Crips, they have the Bloods, you have white Aryan Brotherhood type gangs, and the inmates fight for control of what they have in here.
Brown.
Officials have justified their unwritten policy of assigning cellmates by skin color, saying it curbs interracial violence. But that practice has been challenged. Attorney Burt Dykesler represents a black prisoner, Garrison Johnson, who sued the California prison system over its policy of segregated housing.
170,000 people a year are subject to this kind of behavior, which is not tolerated in any other aspect of American life and hasn't been for 50 years. It's the shame of California.
What's your last name? Dykesler argued that not only is the segregation unconstitutional, it actually strengthens racial prison gangs.
Guy comes off a bus and they look at his skin color and they say he's African American, put him there. The second fellow comes off the bus, they say he's African American, they put him with the first African American. If the first guy is a member of a gang and the second guy isn't, well, he's just assigned a roommate who's going to convert him to the gang. If they're members of opposite quarreling gangs, we've now just created an environment in which cellmates can try to kill one another. And so the whole system makes absolutely no sense.
The U.S. Supreme Court agreed, and a year ago ordered California to take steps to desegregate its prison housing. So last December, state prison authorities announced they would phase in racial desegregation starting on March the 1st of this year.
And I've been assured that the training sessions are ongoing and that this will be successfully rolled out as scheduled.
But that scheduled start date has come and gone. There's been no training, no new system rolled out, and prison authorities admit desegregation is still a long way off.
We're looking at conservatively between 12 to 16 months.
Victor Almager, associate warden at Deuel, is a member of a task force working on racial integration in the prisons. He says the delay is due in part to the time it takes to modify the system of record keeping and collect data on all inmates.
So that will take some time for us to do. Once we've accomplished the coding, once we've accomplished training for our staff, information to both offenders, staff, and the public, and we have coded all of the offenders, then we can begin our housing protocol.
But racial desegregation will be an uphill battle. The gangs have a lot at stake and use racial solidarity as a means of control.
Since I was a young kid.
34-year-old Andre Williams has spent most of his adult life behind bars. He says he'd be in danger from other African Americans if he associates with other races.
They're going to downlook you for that. And you might get jumped, you might get slashed, you might get cut. It just promotes a problem.
You might be assaulted just for bunking with someone of the opposite
outside your race because you're going against the standards and the morals of the prison.
Latino and white inmates have similar standards.
It is a code, and it's basically death before dishonor. That's it. That's it. If you don't comply by those rules, you're going to be complied to.
The inmates' racial rules require obedience to a code that forbids prisoners from exercising with, bunking with, or eating with inmates of other races.
I'm pretty new to this, so I'm considered one of the soldiers. And when something comes up and happens within my car or within the white race period, then I'm going to have to get up and I'm going to have to put it down.
Guards are also worried that racial integration could spark violence. Chuck Alexander is Executive Vice President of the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, the prison guards union. He says an inmate could try to sabotage desegregation plans by attacking a guard.
Because by doing that, he then goes into an administrative segregation setting, et cetera, and he doesn't lose face with the other individuals that were trying to get him to do something, because assaulting an officer kind of gives him a free pass, so to speak.
The guards' fears seem borne out. Inmates told us that racial integration would bring resistance, even if it means going into maximum security, aka the hole.
If they implement it, okay, what's going to happen is in a breakdown mode, first bunk that happens, the person's going to refuse to go bunk with that race, refuse to go eat with that race. They're going to refuse. Then they're going to go to the hole. Then the holes are going to be filled because everybody's going to have to follow that suit.
Being in and out of the system for years that I've seen and done things here, it could get ugly. It could really get ugly. And behind closed doors, a lot of sneaky and dirty things happen.
The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that racial segregation can be used in a limited way for security. That was the tactic used recently in a Los Angeles County jail racked by race riots. Fighting between Latinos and African Americans left 2 inmates dead and more than 100 injured. To diffuse tension, L.A. County Sheriff Lee Baca, the man in charge of the jail system, decided racial segregation was a necessity.
We have been separating the Hispanics and the African American inmates where the disturbances have been occurring, and we're doing it as a temporary provision, obviously to calm things down. I think the segregation will last until the fighting has subsided to the point where we can reintegrate on a safer basis.
But in the state system, prison officials acknowledge that despite intentions, they will never be able to racially integrate many prisoners because of their propensity for violence.
For instance, you may have offenders who have a history of predatory violence towards other races. You may have offenders who have a propensity towards violence towards any cell partner. So we have to look at the case factors because their strategy is security and control.
Because of that control, authorities realize color barriers won't be easily broken. And they expect that if desegregation does take place, once inmates leave their racially integrated cells and go out to the yards or to the dining halls, old patterns of self-segregation will continue.
Spencer Michaels has the prison story.
At a prison near San Diego, nearly 450 inmates live in 3 crowded gymnasiums because there is no other housing available. Some sleep in triple bunk beds. Longer sentences and tougher sentencing laws, especially for drug crimes, have made overcrowding the rule in California prisons. With 162,000 prisoners in 33 prisons, this is the largest prison system in the free world, with a budget larger than that of the University of California. Harsher treatment has also been the rule for at least 2 decades. Weights and other bodybuilding equipment popular with prisoners were banned. New prison designs are more sterile and controlling. Lockdowns are more frequent. And there have been alleged abuses of the system that have contributed to tensions and violence. Guards were accused of staging fights among inmates and then shooting at them. This prison surveillance video from Corcoran Prison shows one of those incidents. Between 1989 and 95, 7 inmates died, 43 were injured. The U.S. Attorney brought criminal civil rights charges, still pending, against 8 guards.
These defendants used their authority to sponsor blood sports. In the process, they violated the civil rights of the individuals and abused their power and the public trust.
The Corcoran incidents, plus the statewide conditions due to overcrowding and the prevalence of prison gangs, have many people saying the system is ripe for change. Much of the motivation for that change comes from a fear of what will happen when large numbers of people are released. About half of all California prisoners are let out on parole every 2 years. Many are unprepared for life on the outside, according to sociology professor Elliott Currie.
The vast majority of people that we put behind bars are coming out. They're going to be on your street next year. And the question is, what kind of a guy do you want to be on your street next year? I think the real issue is, what are we going to do to make it less likely that he's going to be dangerous, to make it less likely that he's going to hurt somebody, that he's going to rob somebody?
There's no question that most prisoners have a hard time going straight once they're outside. 75% of them have no job, 50% are essentially illiterate, and 85% are substance abusers. Most of the inmates of the R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility, a medium security prison just 2 miles from the Mexican border, have come back into custody several times. These prisoners say nothing inside has prepared them for the transition. Todd Perdue is serving his 4th term.
All I learned there was how to make knives out of coffee, out of coffee cans and out of plastic, and how to make bombs. I didn't really learn anything that would help me for society. And they dumped me out there with $200 gate money and say, make a life.
Donovan's warden, John Ratelle, says the pressures on the outside may be too great for many inmates to handle.
We give him $200 parole money, and $200 if he doesn't have a place to go or a place, somewhere to go. And if he doesn't have a job, then what's he do? He's going to revert back to crime because he's got to survive. Sometimes people panic, and they go back to their same neighborhoods, the same places they came from, their buddies, peer pressure. A lot of those things play on a person's success or failure.
While incarcerated, the vast majority of state prisoners have little to do all day. Only 4%, or 7,000, work in prison industries like this bakery, which provides bread for other prisons. Often the minimal skills inmates learn here don't translate to jobs on the outside. Since prisoner-made products can be sold only to state institutions, the number of jobs is limited. Prisons also provide classes in printing and graphics and landscaping and other potential occupations. But at Donovan, only about 10% of the inmates are enrolled in these vocational training programs, about the same percentage statewide. Other inmates are ineligible because of disciplinary problems or a history of violence, or they're just not interested.
That's because you typed a lowercase k.
Academic and reading classes take place in all California prisons by law, and 10% of the inmates are enrolled in these programs as well. Sometimes the classes make a big difference, but often they don't reach the inmates who need them. Frederick Woods is an inmate clerk in the program.
There's a lot of inmates who are really interested and really willing to get into the program and get their education, but then there's a lot of them who are in the program who don't reap all the benefits because they really don't want the education.
Most experts believe nothing will work to make prisoners ready to function as citizens until the issue of their drug abuse is confronted. That is happening on a small scale at R.J. Donovan, where the system's first drug program has existed since 1990. But substance abuse is hardly addressed at all in most California prisons.
Some of you guys think that you don't have an addictive personality, and I would suggest that take a look at yourself again.
Donovan's effort was a pilot project involving 200 prisoners.
For me personally, I don't have any family, so it's been real easy for me to get back into that cycle of drugs and violence, and because of that, coming back to jail and prison. Coming through this has given me a support network, which is like a surrogate family. So that gives me people to fall onto when I need that help.
Let us celebrate this gift not only for ourselves. Let us celebrate this gift not only for ourselves, but for the
The cost of the drug program is $3,000 per inmate, on top of the $21,000 a year for keeping an inmate behind bars. Program advocates like the Warden say the drug program actually saves money by keeping inmates from returning to prison.
You're saying it's cheaper to pay the extra money to do the drug program than it is to keep the guy in prison?
Absolutely. Well, to keep the guy from coming back to prison is a better term, I think.
Anybody listening to that argument?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're getting some recognition in the legislature. They've given us more money on substance abuse programs.
California will soon be providing drug programs for about 9,000 inmates, a huge increase. Corrections officials were swayed by a study which showed that the recidivism rate among inmates who completed substance abuse programs in prison and also after their release was only a third that of those who did not take part. Corrections Director Cal Terhune.
Yes, it's worth it. If you can cut down the recycling, it's going to be worth it. An investment at the front end in terms of prevention before they commit the crime is going to pay off in the long run.
In the study, the key to success was the drug treatment programs for parolees, like this one in San Francisco called Milestones.
My name's David, I'm an addict.
60 former inmates now on parole from state prison live for 6 months to a year in a residential facility where they have meetings, get help with substance abuse, job searches, health, and adjustment to society. Most of them had no access to drug programs inside prison.
I had a substance abuse problem when I went in and through my course of staying in the system. It's been like 12 years now, almost 13. Being inside, I felt that they don't deal with the issue. They'll tell you not to use drugs, but they don't tell you how to stay off of them.
The rehabilitation, they're not interested. We are a number. We are a statistic for the state of California, the California Department of Corrections.
These people have yet to make it. Even the few who got some treatment in prison emphasized the need for follow-up programs, which they didn't get until now.
And I finished the drug program, but then when I came out with a lot of issues, and I didn't follow up on my recovery, and I went back to prison 2 times more after that.
These parolees complained that both in-prison and aftercare programs like Milestones are scarce, and there's often a waiting list. Corrections officials agree.
Those are the kinds of programs that we're just very quietly spinning up. But there's a lot been done, and there's a lot more to do, but we're in the right direction.
In fact, the number of community beds for drug treatment has been increasing under state pressure. But politically, beefing up prison drug and education programs does not please some tough-on-crime politicians. Republican Assemblyman Jim Battin is skeptical of those plans.
If you go to prison for 18 months on a drug offense, you're not getting drugs for 18 months unless you're getting them within the prison. To have a drug treatment program inside a prison is almost nonsensical because they're denied the drugs. We have to make prisons a place of punishment, a place of deterrence, and that's a place of justice.
Battin does not want to change the purpose of the Department of Corrections, which right now is purely punishment.
There is an effort right now in the legislature to make prisons a place of rehabilitation first and punishment second, and it doesn't work. They tried to do that before. It's a failed policy of the left. It has not worked in the past. When we had that, we had people get early release, we had more victimization, we had higher crime rates.
Battin is opposing a bill by California Democratic Senator John Vasconcellos that would make one purpose of prison rehabilitation.
You include rehabilitation, is that the right word?
Yes, it is the right word. It's the right word, and it's the essential effort so that when people come out of prison, they don't continue their actions and maraud the rest of us and go back to prison again. We pay some more money.
Vasconcellos says he doesn't want to ease up on punishment for criminals.
I'm not talking about not punishing, I'm just simply talking about doing it in a smart way so that when a person comes out, he isn't more rageful and more likely to make more trouble for me.
After 20 years of expensive prison construction and almost no concern for rehabilitation, Vasconcellos says that despite some opposition, he senses a political opening.
Times change, and people change, and people wake up, and issues get framed differently and recognized differently, and leaders are about trying to help that process happen, or ought to be.
California's prison building binge may be slowing down. Nonetheless, Democratic Governor Gray Davis recently signed a bill authorizing construction of yet another new prison.
By April of 2002, we'll be out of space entirely, double-celled everywhere, and we run the risk, if we did not do something, that a federal judge would order that prisoners be released before they serve their full sentence.
Elected as a tough-on-crime candidate, Davis has yet to be heard from on whether he will support major policy changes for this vast prison system.